Hi, welcome to the Listen Up Girl podcast, your daily LGBTQ plus news podcast. I'm your host, Zach Reynolds-Friedman. And today we're going global because the fight for our community doesn't stop at any border. From Russia to Japan to Ghana to the United Nations, there's a lot happening in the world right now, and you deserve to know it all. So let's get into it. First, Russia drops the hammer on 9 LGBTQ plus organizations. So we start today in Russia, where things just got significantly darker, and trust me, I did not think that was possible. Human Rights Watch released a report yesterday on May 28th announcing that Russian courts have banned 9 LGBTQ plus support organizations as so-called extremist groups. 9. Between March and May of this year alone, courts across 7 Russian regions have shuttered groups that provided legal help, psychological support, and basic community resources to queer Russians. The groups banned included some of the most well-known in Russia: Coming Out, the Russian LGBTQ Network, the Moscow Community Center for LGBTQ plus initiatives, and Center T, which served transgender and non-binary people. They weren't radical organizations, they were lifelines. All of this traces back to 2023 Russian Supreme Court decision that declared that so-called international LGBT movement an extremist organization. That movement, by the way, doesn't actually exist as a formal entity. The Russian government essentially invented something to ban. And since that ruling, the floodgates opened. Rainbow flags have led to fines, social media posts have led to criminal charges, and now, one by one, every remaining support structure for LGBTQ plus Russians is being legally dismantled. One of the banned groups, Perini Plus, was designated extremist in part because, and I want to be clear with this when you hear this, criticized Russian laws, according to the court, showed contempt for President Vladimir Putin. Showing contempt for Putin in extremism. Got it. Center T, which served the trans community, called the decision unfounded and repressive and pledged to continue its work. And Coming Out, one of the first groups to be banned earlier this spring, released a statement saying, "Our community is stronger than any labels, and history has proven that." To the LGBTQ plus community still inside Russia, we see you, we stand with you, and your courage is extraordinary. Next, the United Nations says the trend is worsening. So on May 18th, just 11 days ago, the UN's top human rights officials sounded the alarm in a very serious way. Volker Türk, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, released a statement warning that violence and discrimination against LGBTQ plus people are widespread and getting worse. He said that 1 in 3 countries around the world still criminalizes consensual same-sex conduct, and several countries still maintain the death penalty for it. In schools alone, 45% of LGBTQ plus youth reported being bullied. 45%, nearly half of the kids, are going to school afraid. Türk specifically called out what happened in the past year. Burkina Faso criminalized consensual same-sex regions. Senegal doubled its prison terms for same-sex acts from 5 years to 10, and he warned that similar laws are being actively considered in other countries, including Ghana, which we'll get to that in just a moment. The High Commissioner's message was direct. The trend is worsening. He used those exact words. And given everything we're seeing in Russia and Africa and other parts of the world right now, it's hard to argue with him. This is what your daily dose of global LGBTQ news matters, because what happens in Africa and Moscow and Tokyo affect all of us. Now let's go to Ghana's anti-gay bill, a conference in Accra, and a dangerous momentum. So staying in Africa, the situation in Ghana is escalating, and it's happening right now. Ghana's parliament reintroduced its so-called Human Sexual Rights and Family Values Act back in February of this year. This bill, if signed into law, this bill would impose up to 3 years of prison for anyone who identifies as LGBTQ+. It would force the disbanding of all LGBTQ+ organizations in the country. It would criminalize parents, teachers, doctors, and journalists who are seen as supporting LGBTQ+ people. And it would hold property owners liable if their spaces are used for any LGBTQ+ related gathering. This week, from May 27th to May 30th, Ghana is hosting the 4th African Inter-Parliamentary Conference on Family and Sovereignty, This conference has documented ties to U.S.-based far-right advocacy groups, and previous editions have featured speakers who held up in Uganda's Anti-Homosexuality Act as a model for the rest of Africa. Uganda's law, you will recall, includes the death penalty. At this year's gathering, Uganda's Parliament Speaker, Anita Among, reportedly urged African institutions to protect the continent from what she called cultural distortion. Let me translate that for you. She's talking about us. Human Rights Watch has finally called Ghana's parliament to reject the bill, warning it violates Ghana's obligations under the African Charter on Human Rights and People's Rights. And Ghana's own Commission on Human Rights and Administration Justice has warned Parliament that the bill would infringe on the fundamental rights of Ghanaian citizens. This is opposition. Cardinal Peter Turkison and politician Samia Anukram have spoken out calling for dialogue and inclusion. But with President John Dramani Mahama signaling his support for the legislation, the threat is very real. We will be watching Ghana closely and we'll bring you updates as they come out. Next, Japan's Supreme Court takes up marriage equality. Now for a story that carries both enormous hope and a reminder that justice moves slowly, sometimes agonizingly slow. Japan's Supreme Court has agreed to take up marriage equality. In late March, the court's grand bench that all 15 justices formally accepted same-sex marriage lawsuits had been working their way through Japan's lower courts for years. Here's where things stand. Of the 6 high court's rulings in this series of cases, 5 found that banning same-sex marriage is unconstitutional. 5 out of 6, that one outlier was the Tokyo High Court, which ruled that last November that the ban was actually constitutional, making it the only court in the group to go that direction. The split is now landing at the Supreme Court, which is expected to issue a ruling in early 2027. And whatever the Supreme Court decides will be binding. Japan remains, as this is a fact, still stuns me every time I say this, the only G7 nation that does not legally recognize same-sex couples in any form. Not marriage, not civil unions, nothing. This in a country where public support for marriage equality sits at roughly 69%. The Prime Minister of Japan's first female head of government has been cautioned at best when it comes to marriage equality, reiterating that the Constitution defines marriage in terms of a husband and wife. That framing is exactly what advocates are challenging in court. The Marriage for All Japan Alliance has been fighting for years, and with a Supreme Court ruling on the horizon in 2027, could be a defining moment for LGBTQ rights in one of the world's largest democracies. We are watching, we are waiting, and we'll be rooting hard for every queer couple in Japan who deserves the same right as everyone else. It's crazy that we are still talking about stories where countries are criminalizing people that are part of the LGBTQ plus community, and in a G7 country, we still don't have marriage equality. It's like we are so far behind in this world. This whole world is just, it's agonizing. Next, Mexico moves to criminalize transfemicide. So let's end today with something that reflects both the ongoing horror of anti-trans violence and the determination of lawmakers to fight back. In Mexico, multiple states are moving this year to reform their penal codes to specifically recognize and prosecute what advocates call transfemicide, the target of killing trans women. 4 Mexican states took this step in 2025, and more are expected to follow in 2026. Trans women in Mexico, particularly trans women of color, face terrifying rates of violence. Advocates have spent years arguing that existing murder laws fail to account for the unique targeting of trans women, that these are not random acts of violence, but hate rumors rooted in transphobia. Having transfemicide named and codified in law matters. It sends a message about who is valued and whose death counts. The legislative movement is part of a broader wave of pro-LGBTQ plus legal team reforms working their way through Mexico, a country that has, in recent years, seen some of the most active state-by-state legislative process on queer rights in Latin America. It's a reminder that even in the face of global rollbacks we covered today, community advocates, lawyers, and lawmakers are still fighting and winning ground. So that's the news today for Listen Up Girl, your daily LGBTQ plus news podcast. I hate bringing this news that is so negative, but it is important that we all keep and stay informed. Thank you so much for being here today and listening. Please share this episode with somebody who needs it, and I'll be back tomorrow with more LGBTQ plus news.